Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us, the National Zoning Atlas, for our latest zoning report on Cape Cod. I'm Sarah Bronin, and I'm delighted to welcome you today. Joining me is Chloe Schaefer, the Chief Planner of the Cape Cod Commission, and two of our outstanding analysts, Jonah and Jake, who will introduce themselves a little bit later. To kick off our conversation, we invited Chloe, who again is the chief planner at the regional body that helps to shepherd local governments through the process of understanding zoning and improving their zoning in light of best practices. And has done a significant amount of analysis of housing conditions and zoning conditions across the Cape. I'm going to just turn it over to her for a few minutes so that she can set the stage for a discussion, and I think really get to the question of why do we care about zoning in Cape Cod in the first place? So thanks, Chloe. Take it away.
Great. Thanks, Sarah. Good afternoon, everyone. As Sarah mentioned, I'm the Chief Planner at the Cape Cod Commission. The Commission is the regional regulatory and planning agency for Barnstable County, which more familiar to many people as Cape Cod. And really zoning, we've been looking at it for decades, but I would say most recently, really in light of our housing affordability challenges. We know that it's really critical in terms of shaping our housing landscape. And while we've faced housing affordability challenges for a while, it's certainly something that's become much more acute over the last several years. And to address that, we just last year completed our first regional housing strategy, and that really identifies the key challenges for the region in terms of housing. Of course, it's very expensive. It was estimated that a household needs more than $200,000 in terms of annual income to affordably purchase a medium-priced home in the region, and that's more than double the actual median household income. And it can be really challenging to even find housing that is available. We have seasonal pressures, of course, the Cape being a big vacation destination. About a third of our housing stock is used seasonally, so that certainly impacts our housing market and what's available. But also, it's really pretty complicated, or in many cases, we know now it's not allowed to build housing other than single family homes in the region. So there aren't a lot of other options for people. About 80% of our housing stock is detached single family homes. And then when we look at our zoning, that's perhaps not that surprising because that is what we're zoning for. So our regional housing strategy recognizes this. As Sarah mentioned, we've done some analysis, kind of similar, but not identical to the National Zoning Atlas, looking at the towns in our region and what they allow in terms of housing to help really point towards the need for changing zoning in the region to allow for different types of housing in those areas where we can't support it with infrastructure. And so that's a key recommendation of our regional housing strategy. We also have local zoning recommendations based on the differences among the town's zoning in the region, but certainly really excited that now not only looking town by town throughout the Cape with the National Zoning Atlas, we can look at how our zoning compares to other places throughout the country and really putting it into that context as we look to address our housing challenges. So with that, I will turn it back over to Sarah.
Thanks so much, Chloe. And we've really appreciated our partnership with the Cape Cod Commission. They have checked over some of our assumptions, provided us information about conditions on the ground, and really served as a guiding force as we tried to really get to this very complicated question of how zoning works in Barnstable County. So thank you, Chloe, for your leadership in convening conversations and about this topic and really investing in research and again, trying to provide examples for local governments on best practices as well. We're delighted that we have been able to incorporate the Cape into the National Zoning Atlas, along with, we should say, the entire state of Massachusetts. Soon we'll post an online version of an in-person session we had just a couple weeks ago, unveiling the entire Massachusetts Zoning Atlas. this webinar represents the first deep dive from the data that we've been able to amass across the entire state. So we do want to recognize, in light of that work that we've done statewide, a number of our other partners. First, to recognize Suffolk University, where Professor John Infranca has led a group of students and others who provided some initial data collection, especially for zoning texts, but in partnership with ZS Consulting, some GIS data as well for jurisdictions across the state. Our work has also been supported by the Bar Foundation and the Massachusetts Association of Realtors, as well as both globally and also Suffolk's work in Massachusetts, supported by the Mercatus Center at George Mason University. So thank you to all of our partners who have worked to delve into this really complicated question. Without you, it would not have been possible. So with that, I want to turn to the contents of the presentation today. And we made it simple, just 4 parts. The first part is just a brief explainer about why we are undertaking the National Zoning Atlas in the first place. What do we hope to achieve, and how does Cape Cod fit into that? Second, we're going to discuss how it's made. And for that, I'm going to turn it over to Jonah. Third, we're going to talk about using the NZA, and Jake will pick up on that. Then fourth, we're going to talk about how Cape Cod zones, and Jonah and I will tag team that. So stay tuned for their introductions shortly. But my part for now is just to talk about why we started this project in the first place. It really started back in 2020 in the neighboring state, Connecticut, and the Connecticut Zoning Atlas. And very big picture, our mission is really divided into 3 parts. So we want to centralize information about zoning, and we do that by digitizing information about both the text and the map, and pushing it out into the online public map that you can see at zoningatlas.org. We also say we want to demystify zoning. Zoning is a really opaque regulatory, really opaque set of regulations. What we're trying to do is to standardize understanding about it by again extracting that information, digitizing that, and through our map and through other resources, we want to help people be able to compare jurisdictions to each other. So Chloe talked about comparing Barnstable County zoning to the rest of the country. Even within Barnstable County, as we'll point out, there are differences, and our methods allow that apples to apples comparison. This third component of our mission, the democratizing mission, is really maybe the main justification for the first set of zoning, the first zoning atlas in Connecticut, where advocates used the data to power reforms, in that case, both statewide reforms as well as continuing local reforms on a variety of topics. And we've seen that that impulse or that effect of the National Zoning Atlas in many of the places where we've worked, because we've made information accessible to people so that they can act on it. So those are the 3 reasons why we create the NZA. And just to give you a brief glimpse as to what it looks like, and we'll talk more about the map in a moment. This is the map itself. Again, you can reach it at zoningatlas.org. Any place that's purple or gray are places that we have covered, analyzed, reviewed painstakingly across all of those jurisdictions. And so again, Massachusetts is up there in the top right, completely done, along with neighboring states, Vermont, New Hampshire, Connecticut, and Rhode Island. So turning to how the NCA has been used, and again, just at a very high level here, it has been used in advocacy. There's an image from Vermont. It has been used in analysis. Jonah and another of our analysts, Melissa, worked together on this research published in Zoning Practice using data from Alabama, Florida, New Mexico, and Nevada. We've also conducted research with partners as well as internal research like the zoning report, including this paper with the Regional Plan Association that paired our data with sea level rise. So our data that we've been collecting, again, is not just useful for its own sake, but has also been informing a variety of actions, so advocacy, analysis, and research, and thinking about it in terms of subject matter areas. If we go to the next slide, of course, we are interested in housing affordability, availability, and density. And that, in fact, is the focus of our report that we're talking about today, and many of the characteristics from a regulatory standpoint that we log in the National Zoning Atlas. But as you can see with that one example from the Regional Plan Association, we are really interested in how zoning and climate response works. We are also trying to start up an analysis in Massachusetts, as well as in other parts of the country, like the New York City Metro, of zoning around transit. We look to very broadly at the impacts of zoning on social and environmental factors. We've published a report with the Urban Institute using the Connecticut Zoning Atlas data to show that zoning correlates with racial and income-based segregation. Zoning, of course, also impacts economic growth, where businesses can be located, where and how mixed-use communities are allowed. These are important factors in the strength and resiliency from an economic standpoint of a community. And then finally, the NZA has the power to inform discussions about zoning and food. So we could go on and on about this, but in the interest of time, as we only have 40 minutes today, I do want to turn it over to Jonah to introduce himself and to give you some insights into how the National Zoning Atlas is made. So Jonah, go ahead.
Thank you, Sarah. Hello. To briefly introduce myself, I'm currently a law student at Cornell University. However, I was previously a zoning analyst, and in that role, I worked to analyze some of Massachusetts, including much of Cape Cod, as well as the upzoning requirements from the MBTA and the state. I've also been on NZA teams in many other states across the nation, most recently in Virginia. So our process starts with identifying jurisdictions. So that includes cities, towns, and counties. In Cape Cod, all municipalities have the right to exercise zoning, and this here is a list of some of the jurisdictions in the Cape Cod, Barnstable County area that we looked at. Each zoned jurisdiction is made up of zoning districts. Each zoning district also has its own unique rules. Here are some of the districts in the town of Barnstable. It has 57 districts in total. Some of those allow residential development and some don't. When we figure out a jurisdiction is zoned, we collect the two main components of a zoning code, the zoning text and the zoning map. On your screen, you can see the cover page for the zoning text, as well as the map that we used for the analysis of MASHP. NZA team members then complete two work streams per jurisdiction, text analysis and geospatial analysis. Text analysts obtain zoning texts, specify a list of districts and key data points, and they use a standardized methodology to extract this information. Geospatial analysts obtain zoning maps, specify zoning districts, and either digitize the static map or standardize existing geospatial data. It's along the list of jurisdictions that the two work streams can join. So given my work in other states, I can say that every state is slightly different, and in Cape Cod we had some unique difficulties. So we found that 6 of the towns in Barnstable County have what are called seashore districts, and these were created pursuant to federal law. And seashore areas include both federal land and small parcels of private land. Well, from a mapping standpoint, this actually created some challenges, including funny shapes in particular that we needed to align with the reality on the ground. It also required us to more carefully review the protected lands layer that we used to develop our map across the country. So now I'm going to hand it over to Jake, who's going to talk about ways of using the NZA.
Great, thank you, Jonah. My name's Jake. I'm a geospatial analyst, and I'm currently working on finishing up Virginia and also aiding in a lot of the updates and cleanup in Massachusetts, which includes the recent MBTA zoning updates. And before that, I built out a lot of the complicated zoning GIS in Boston. And before that, I was on the Vermont state team. And now we're going to walk through actually how to use the atlas. And if you would like, you can follow along on zoningatlas.org/atlas. And it's a bit different on your phone or computer, but in this example, we're using screenshots from the desktop version. So here's the map on the national scale, which includes Alaska and Hawaii. The colored in areas, as Sarah said earlier, indicate our total progress. So the purple is zoned land, and the gray is unzoned land, and the white is areas that we haven't filled in yet. And we have 11 states plus the DC area that have been fully completed and integrated into our atlas. And California, Virginia, North Carolina, and a lot of other major metro areas in Texas, Tennessee, New York State are yet to be completed, but they're nearing completion, including Virginia, which I'm working on. You can see is pretty close. And these published areas add up to around 7,700 public jurisdictions. And in these jurisdictions, 4,800 of them have zoning, and we've confirmed that around 2,900 do not. So it's about 2/3 to 1/3 ratio. And within these zone jurisdictions, we've analyzed around 83,000 specific zoning districts, and the analysts have painstakingly sorted through over 860,000 pages of zoning code. And these places are home to around half of the US population and also around half of the acres of total land in the country. So let's dive into the interactive map. So when you open the map, it opens at a national scale, and the legend reflects the zone status of jurisdictions in purple and gray, and the white is yet to be analyzed. And if you have the tribal land and protected land layers on, you can see that these green and gray areas that are most visible in the western states also pop up. In the legend and layer options, you can also select FEMA flood layers, transit stations, and you can change the base map as well. So we can get more specific and zoom to a specific state, metropolitan area, and county. So for example, we chose Cape Cod or Barnstable County in Massachusetts. And if you go even more specific, you can choose a specific jurisdiction, which then creates a black outline. So we choose the town of Barnstable. And if you use the filtering, we can also see the, sorry, I don't know what, oh yeah. So if the purple parts of the map get further broken down into specific types of zoning districts. So dark purple areas are mixed with residential areas, and light purple are primary residential areas. And the more tan colored areas are industrial areas. So that's for industrial uses, airports, other open spaces. So you can also go into filtering, and quick filters are in the show me where people can build box. And in this example, we filtered to show where you can build single family houses. And you can see the map lost a bit of color, but areas that remain colored in are where the criteria satisfies the filter. And in the box in the bottom right, you can see the filtering results. And in this example, around 93% of the zoned acres allow for this single family housing. And that also accounts for around 48% of the zoning districts. And you can go even further in advanced filters for more specific criteria. In this example, we selected where 4+ family housing is allowed by right and also has a minimum parking requirement. And that only really accounts for 2% of the zoned acres, or around 4% of the zoning districts. And you can select multiple different criteria, including height cap, ADUs, minimum lot size, and a lot of different options. And now we'll bring it back over to Sarah, I think.
I'll
back
take
to
over.
Jonah.
Thank you, Jake.
Okay.
All right, next, thank you. So you've seen the map. Now we want to focus on the details of how Cape Cod zones. And I encourage you to check out our zoning report, Cape Cod, which we published just last month. I also want to acknowledge the authors of that report who pulled together what Jake, myself, and other analysts input into a much fuller narrative about the current state of zoning in Cape Cod. So we're going to start with some county-side figures to provide a sense of how all these zoning codes add up across the Cape. So we analyzed about 2,000 pages of zoning regulations, and across zoned districts, there were 299 zoning districts. We also collected up to 200 data points for each of these zoning districts. And as you can see here, all of the jurisdictions in the county are zoned, and that's shown in purple. That's true in virtually all of Massachusetts. Only one jurisdiction does not exercise zoning authority in all of the state. This is in contrast to Western states, which have many jurisdictions and lots of land that are unzoned. From an acreage perspective, even though 100% of jurisdictions zone, just 60% of Cape Cod's land is subject to zoning. And that's mostly because 31% of the land is designated protected land, 1% approximately is tribal land, and 8% is unzoned. Still, zoning is very consequential because it covers land where 99% of the population lives. Of zoned land, 97% allows residential development, which is a fairly high figure. Just to provide a contrast again, only 65% of zoned land in Nevada allows for residential development. Residential development occurs either in what we term as primarily residential areas or in mixed with residential districts, which Jake described. This graphic shows where different types of housing are allowed. So we have columns for 1, 2, 3, and 4 or more family housing and where it is allowed. The dark blue shows where housing is allowed by right, and the lighter shows where you need a special permit. By land area, 95% of land allowing residential development allows 1 unit per lot by right. That means that single-family housing can be built almost anywhere in Cape Cod. Compare that to 26% of land allowing 2 units by right. As you keep adding units, it gets harder to build. The third column show that in this graphic shows that just 1% of residential land allows 3 units per lot by right, with 2% allowing 4 or more by right. This chart is really important because it says that not a lot of land in Cape Cod freely allows for the type of housing most likely to be affordable. On this slide, we can add another dimension to the cost of housing in Cape Cod. The donut, as we call it, shows the percentage of single-family zoned land that has different lot size requirements. The darker part of the graph, the larger the minimum lot sizes. The donut shows that most residential land in Cape Cod, about 62% of single-family land, has a minimum lot size of between 40,000 square feet and 80,000 square feet. 15% requires 80,000 square feet or more as a lot size. Put another way, 77% of single-family land is zoned to require a lot size of 40,000 square feet, which is about an acre. That is really large. Smaller lot sizes are less common. I will also point out to the hatched part of the donut. It says that about 8% of land has lot size mandates that vary. We've logged how they vary, but for the purposes of this graphic, consider that a lot of land in Cape Cod that has more complicated requirements than a simple number. I want to bring up one last type of housing that might be affordable to people, and that is the accessory dwelling unit. That's the kind of granny flat or in-law suite, something that you would build on the same lot as a single-family home. According to our analysis of the text of local ordinances, about 17% of single-family zoned land in Cape Cod prohibits ADU construction. Where ADUs are allowed, occupancy restrictions abound, resulting in a situation where only 9% of residential land allows an ADU without any added restrictions or prohibitions. I hasten to point out that we pulled these statistics from the language on the books in local ordinances. Because recent state legislation has addressed some of these restrictions to legalize more ADUs. In 2024, the state enacted the Affordable Homes Act, which requires all Massachusetts municipalities to provide as-of-right approval for accessory dwelling units up to 900 square feet anywhere a single-family home is allowed. These new laws prohibit municipalities from attaching additional owner occupancy or public hearing requirements. Some jurisdictions will change their local ordinances to update to the new law, but others may not. We will continue to update our data as municipalities update their codes to conform to state law. And for regional findings, I'm going to hand it over back to Sarah.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Jonah and Jake, for your comments and those insights. And thanks, by the way, to our entire analyst team, which has really done a lot of work to clean and prepare the data for not only this presentation, but for the launch of the full Massachusetts Atlas. So a lot of team members were involved, and I want to thank them for their painstaking work, which helped illuminate some of the county-wide trends that Jonah just covered. Before we turn to the next slide, I just want to back up and say, as we said before, Barnstable County has 15 jurisdictions. That actually is a really manageable number of jurisdictions, and it helps us in many ways to look at each individual town. So you will see a few figures in the report, including figures K and L, that provide a side-by-side comparison of different statistics. In the case of those figures, statistics about how 1, 2, 3, and 4 family housing are allowed, as well as ADUs, the percentage of land for each town that allows those types of housing. So I would encourage you to check out those figures and really, again, if you're on the Cape and you're interested in those kinds of comparisons, to really delve into them. So yeah, let's go ahead and turn to the next slide. With 15 towns, we could have tried to cram 15 towns into a single slide, but we just picked 4 representative towns to show you how Jonah's statistics can be broken down onto that individual town level. And as you look at this, again, I'll refer you back to that legend at the bottom of the screen. So something that is in blue on this chart, that deeper blue, is allowed as of right. That lighter blue is allowed subject to a public hearing, and then the gray shows the percentage of land that's prohibited. And the denominator here across all of these categories is the percentage of residentially zoned land. So just looking at the first column in all 4 of these towns, you see there's an awful lot of blue, an awful lot of housing for single family homes, because that's what the first column is, that is allowed by right. Nearly everywhere in 3 of the towns, Mashpee's a little bit of an exception there. But you don't see a lot of blue and deep blue in the next few columns, except for Yarmouth. So again, the columns are 1 family, 2 family, 3 family, and 4 family. And if you go to that chart on the bottom right, you see a big percentage of land, 91% of land in Yarmouth, allows for 2 family housing as of right. So that's kind of an interesting thing. Looking at the zoning code there, it allows duplexes. You might wonder how many duplexes have been created in Yarmouth. That's something we haven't done a big analysis on the as-built, but maybe there's a few more there than in other places. If you look at the gray, especially in those right-hand columns, you see a lot of gray. A lot of land prohibits 2, 3, and 4 family housing. And again, here, just as an example, you can see Mashpee and Provincetown both have that light blue. And in Mashpee, 100% of land allows for 2, 3, and 4 family housing, but subjects it to a public hearing. I'm not sure that Mashpee has, again, in the as-built department, resulted in has seen a lot of apartments or even duplexes or triplexes. Provincetown too has these public hearing requirements and an inclusionary zoning component to its code. Whether that has allowed for a lot of housing in Provincetown of the 2, 3, and 4 plus family nature, I'm not so sure. But looking at this sort of interim pathway, this public hearing pathway, we might ask whether having a public hearing is effective in actually producing housing. Whether it does provide the safeguards that towns want when they see new multifamily housing being proposed, or whether there's more of a middle ground in the regulatory landscape, where there's a middle ground perhaps between totally prohibiting all of that kind of housing, as again most towns in the Cape tend to do, or whether in the 2 and 3 family context, we might push for a little bit more housing allowed as of right as a percentage of residentially zoned land. So again, these 4 figures we chose just to provide an illustration of how different regulatory environments may work. And turning to the next slide, similarly, we see differences in square footage. Now, if you follow the NZA, you saw perhaps that last week we released an explainer about why we changed from measuring minimum lot sizes in acreage to square feet. And if you didn't see that explainer, it's a really important change in our methodology, at least to the extent to which we display that for the public. But looking at this 80,000 square feet, or about 2 acres, that very darkest green, you see 2-acre requirements in both Mashpee and Yarmouth. Interestingly, Provincetown has these lighter greens, which means that Provincetown requires not so much land. In that sense, it may be seen as more permissive of housing, at least single family housing. So by the way, all of these charts relate to single family zoned land and the minimum lot sizes for single family zoned land. But again, you see differences between the towns. If you really dig down, you see Provincetown has a different approach than Mashpee. Barnstable has a basically 1 acre to 2 acre, or 40,000 to 79,999 square feet minimum lot size requirement. And that's the bulk of Barnstable. So it takes a more uniform approach, as opposed to looking at a Yarmouth or a Mashpee, which has multiple different categories. So again, the countywide statistics tell one story. It tells the story of the averages, or the overall amount of land and how those are allocated when it comes to minimum lot sizes. But what's really interesting about our data on the Cape is that you can drill down. And so I will point you to the appendix, which provides single-page summaries for each and every town. So 15 pages, which includes not only these housing units allowed images that you saw on the last slide, and not only the minimum lot size images that you see on this slide, but also important information about accessory dwelling units, about land categories, so the amount of land within the town that is protected or unzoned, as well as the basic type of zoning, how much land is primarily residential, mixed with residential or non-residential. So I encourage you to go further in our report, to use our map, and to use the appendix if you're interested in learning a little bit more about how individual towns exercise their zoning authority. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jake, who's going to show us how you can create some of the graphics that I just showed yourself.
Great. So the NZA also has zoning snapshots, which is a visual statistics summary of any jurisdiction, county, or metro area. And it's published to, you can do it on any jurisdiction on the NZA, and we'll show you what they look like. So here we can see snapshots for the town of Barnstable and Barnstable County. And you can see that the town shows more permissive treatment of multifamily housing in the county as a whole, and also has more zoned land overall. And these snapshots overall summarize some of the key statistics that appear in our report. And you can generate your own by going to zoningatlas.org/snapshots. Or if you select a jurisdiction and scroll down from the map, you can also generate it there.
Great, thanks, Jake. And so I'll just wrap up here and point to the very last section of the report, where we offered a few ideas about ways that the local towns within Barnstable County could continue to improve their approach to housing. So one thing to do is to really focus in on those accessory dwelling units, ensure that those local ordinances are consistent with the state ADU law. As Jonah said, we'll go back at some point and sweep through the codes again to do an update. But our first sweep of the ordinances hadn't quite caught up to the state law. So in addition to being consistent with that, we might suggest going a little bit further and legalizing ADUs by right, whether they're 900 square feet or less, or simply more generally have less square footage than the single family home. We'd also suggest lifting other occupancy restrictions where they still exist. Third, we included just a brief suggestion about targeting a percentage of land for at least 3-family housing, recognizing that there are sewer and water infrastructure issues across the county that may prevent much larger developments. But even 2 and 3 family housing could be an opportunity for towns to improve the options. And I should say, in tandem with that, allowing multifamily housing near that existing water or sewer infrastructure. And one thing we haven't put on the national map at this point is the location of water and sewer lines. We actually had that in the original Connecticut zoning atlas. So at some point you may see that pop up again, but that seems to be would be of special interest in the jurisdictions we're talking about today. And then finally, given the prevalence of large minimum lot sizes, reducing, I mean, the minimum lot size is down to less than 10,000 square feet. Provincetown is a good example of a place that has had lower minimum lot sizes than anywhere else. And that might be a model for other towns. So just to say, in conclusion, we hope that you use the tools that we've talked about today, the map itself, the zoning snapshots, the report, and our social medias on the next slide for you to follow us, to ask additional questions that we won't get to in the last 10 minutes of our presentation today, and to connect with us in all of these different formats. So with that, I will open it up to any questions that folks have. Again, we only have 10 minutes, but happy to address any questions about our methodology, about our findings, about the report itself. We are all ears. And as folks get ready, I'd love to know if Chloe, you're still there.
Yes,
If
I
you
am.
Yeah, if you might talk about just briefly how towns might be able to use the kind of zoning data that we've put out for planning purposes. I mean, perhaps using some of the ways that they've incorporated your analysis on zoning in the past.
Sure. So I think this can be a really helpful tool in really, I guess I'd say, helping people who maybe aren't in the weeds of zoning on a daily basis better understand what is allowed in their town and where, and perhaps uncover some things they might be surprised about. And also seeing what might be allowed and where in towns neighboring them or other communities that they might look to be modeling off of. So I think it could certainly be helpful in that sense, and kind of identifying areas that they think might be appropriate for zoning changes, and kind of then using this to see what they're starting with and where they might go.
Thanks, and we certainly hope that that does happen. And I think your mention of sort of neighboring towns, looking at what happens along borders is something that we're pretty interested in too. It could change pretty significantly from one town to the next, and I think you can see that in some of the jurisdictions on the Cape, especially when you look at the map. So thanks for raising that point, which we forgot to include in our discussion. We see a question from David about whether there will be a way to see the historical data after we've updated areas based on policy changes. So I mentioned the statewide ADU law, which is influencing change at the local level, as well as the MBTA Communities Act, which affects 177 jurisdictions in and around or around Boston. And I know both Jonah and Jake have been working really diligently on those MBTA Communities Act updates, because in that case, towns have to submit their changes to the state and they have to be approved. And I don't know, Jonah and Jake, if you guys want to talk a bit about that process, and then I'll get back to David's question. Has that been an easy process? Have you seen issues related to those updates?
It's been painstaking. So we've gone through and made sure that we've captured all of the images of sort of, I guess you would say, the before maps before any update has been made. And then we're able to mark in our own system when a new ordinance was adopted in order to update the zoning in the map that complies with MBTA regulations. And then we're able to add in the zoning information and also add the relevant mapping information. And one thing also that we have to consider is that some jurisdictions are adopting what they consider to be stopgap measures so that they comply with state law while they take more time to figure out how they want to comply with it in the long term. So presumably we'll have to go back again to those jurisdictions to see what they end up adopting later on and then mark that change. And so you'll be able to get the sort of sequence over time as it changes. What the precise method for viewing that on the public map is, I'm not sure yet. Maybe Sarah will be able to speak more to that, but
Yeah, I'll take that one, that part of it. And so David, we have collected, as Jonas said, the pre-data, and we're collecting the post data as jurisdictions submit it and get approved. We have discussed internally being able to allow the public map to roll back to specific dates. That process will be enormously complicated, but we have the data. Rest assured, we are collecting both. What we do is we retire districts within our backend database. But how we get that into the public map, which already is extremely complicated, just from a GIS and database standpoint, enterprise, is a question. We may hope to tackle that in early 2026, but it is a live question. I'm actually going to go to the question from an anonymous attendee about, maybe I'll pitch this one to Jake, because the question here is, I mean, I'll broaden it out a bit about how difficult it was to deal with or to collect zoning data, and to maybe if you could provide us an understanding of the way towns keep their data and the process that you use to get it from the town's format into our map from a geospatial standpoint. So the question did have a geospatial component. So Jake, you want to talk about that process, and maybe if there were any special difficulties with Cape Cod jurisdiction?
Yeah, definitely. Usually our digitization process requires us to go from using raster data, which is sort of online zoning maps that are basically just pictures on PDFs, and we have to georeference those and then manually draw out a bunch of shapes, basically that correspond to actual interactable shapes on the and vectors on the interactive map that we can upload. And for Cape Cod, a lot of that, like most of the country, it was sort of, like Jonas said, it can be a pretty painstaking process. Luckily, Massachusetts itself has a pretty robust GIS database. But Cape Cod particular, a lot of towns, especially smaller jurisdictions, sometimes we don't have high quality maps, or the map isn't online and has to be printed. And sometimes it's black and white, even though it has a colored key, which can always bring up difficulties. But I would say Cape Cod specifically, in the geospatial context, because of its pretty complicated shoreline, and we use Truro as an example, since we punch out a lot of protected areas and water data and rights of way in certain parcels, it made it pretty difficult and oftentimes sort of up to our interpretation on what counts as a seashore protected area and what counts as actual zoned district. And sometimes that made that sort of sparse area of parcels in Truro, and sometimes the districts don't perfectly align to the shoreline. And so I would say that was the biggest difficulty. But yeah.
Thanks for that. And I know, from a text standpoint, and that's Jonah's side of the house, there were some, there's always difficulties collecting zoning text when you look statewide, for example. We've had some difficulties, but I don't think we had a lot of issues collecting zoning texts in these jurisdictions, in part probably thanks to the fact that the Cape Cod Commission has help to encourage a spirit of making the information available, and we've seen that in Massachusetts, in the eastern part of the state, much more so, I would say, than the western part of the state. A last question I think we have just 1 minute to get to is, how does Cape Cod compare to other similar geographies? And I think whenever you say, what is a similar geography to from one region to the next, you always step in it, because nobody wants to say, well, Cape Cod is just like this set. Is it like another area where you have seasonal rentals? Is it like an Aspen area in Colorado? Is it like a Vail? Or is it more like other shoreline communities? Are we talking about the coast of Rhode Island? Are we talking about Nantucket and Martha's Vineyard? So for me, when I hear a question like that, I think, oh my gosh, I'm not going to say even what a similar geography is. But what I would point you to, if you're interested and you have an idea about what similar geographies are to these 15 very unique towns, I would say go to those zoning snapshots, because the URL that Jake's pointed out, zoningatlas.org/snapshots, because you'll be able to look at different counties in Massachusetts. You'll be able to look at different metropolitan areas. You'll be able to look at entire states. And as you utilize those drop downs, it'll spit out statistics about places where you think are geographies that you think are similar to Cape Cod. So Chloe, I hope I answered that question correctly. There is no place like Cape Cod, which is why we're so glad that we've hopefully helped to illuminate some of the very unique zoning conditions there. And I'll encourage the person who asked the question to explore our zoning snapshots, to explore our map, just like I will to everybody who's joined our call and who will be watching this webinar later. So with that, it's time for us to close. I really appreciate, again, our full team, our supporters, the Cape Cod Commission for their leadership in this area, and encourage everyone to continue the conversation about improving zoning in Barnstable County and of course across the country. So thanks everybody, and take care. Bye-bye.